There is a quiet truth about success that many people overlook. Most believe success begins with opportunity, talent, or luck. They search for the right moment, the right environment, or the right people to change their lives. Yet the deeper truth is far simpler and far more demanding. Success begins with the discipline of the mind. Before a person can master the world outside, they must learn to master the world within. The human mind is powerful, but it is also restless. Left undirected, it wanders toward comfort, distraction, fear, and doubt. It seeks the easiest path rather than the most meaningful one. This is why so many people feel capable of greatness yet remain trapped in cycles of procrastination and hesitation. The obstacle is rarely intelligence or ability, it is the absence of inner discipline. Mental discipline is not about suppressing thoughts or forcing yourself into constant productivity. It is about learning to guide your attention intentionally. Every day, the mind presents countless impulses: the desire to delay work, the temptation to escape responsibility, the fear of failure, the craving for approval. When these impulses control your actions, your life becomes reactive rather than purposeful. But when you discipline your mind, something remarkable happens. You begin to choose your thoughts instead of being ruled by them. You recognize that not every emotion deserves obedience, and not every doubt deserves belief. Gradually, you learn to pause between impulse and action. In that small space of awareness, true freedom is born. The disciplined mind understands that growth often feels uncomfortable. Effort, repetition, and persistence rarely produce instant rewards. Yet discipline allows a person to move forward even when motivation fades. While motivation is emotional and temporary, discipline is stable and reliable. It becomes the quiet force that carries you through days when enthusiasm disappears. Over time, this inner structure transforms your life. When the mind becomes organized, your actions follow naturally. Decisions become clearer. Focus becomes sharper. Energy is no longer scattered across endless distractions. Instead, it flows toward meaningful goals. This is why success often appears mysterious to those who observe it from the outside. They see the achievement, but not the invisible structure behind it. They notice the results, but not the years of mental training that shaped the person who created those results. Discipline does something deeper than producing success. It reshapes identity. Each time you choose effort over avoidance, clarity over confusion, and purpose over distraction, you reinforce a new version of yourself. You slowly become someone who can be trusted by your own mind, and that trust is powerful. When you know that you will act on your commitments regardless of mood, fear begins to lose its authority. Challenges no longer feel like threats, but like invitations to expand your capacity. Eventually, the disciplined mind develops a quiet confidence. It does not rely on external validation, because it has experienced its own strength repeatedly. It understands that progress is not built on perfect circumstances, but on consistent action. When the mind becomes disciplined, success stops feeling like a distant dream. It becomes a natural consequence of who you have become. Opportunities appear more clearly because your focus is sharper. Relationships improve because your emotions are steadier. Creativity expands because your thoughts are no longer chaotic. Everything begins to align because the foundation is stable. The world often teaches people to chase outcomes first: wealth, recognition, achievement. But outcomes are fragile if the mind behind them is undisciplined. A strong mind, however, can rebuild success again and again because it possesses the true source of power. So the real task is not to chase success directly. The real task is to train the mind to remain steady, intentional, and focused even when the path becomes difficult. Once that inner discipline is established, success is no longer something you pursue desperately. It becomes something that naturally follows the person you have chosen to become. Success is often imagined as something created by favorable circumstances, powerful connections, or fortunate timing. Many people believe that if their environment were different, if they had more resources, or if opportunities appeared at the right moment, success would naturally follow. Yet this belief overlooks a deeper truth about human potential. The true foundation of success lies not in the outer world, but in the mastery of the inner one. The condition of the mind determines how a person responds to every circumstance, whether favorable or difficult. The mind acts as the lens through which reality is interpreted. Two individuals may face the same situation, yet their outcomes can be completely different. One may see obstacles, limitations, and reasons to stop. The other may see challenges that contain hidden opportunities for growth. What separates them is not the situation itself, but the structure of their thinking. A disciplined and focused mind transforms adversity into a field of learning, while an undirected mind often turns even opportunity into confusion. External conditions are constantly changing. Economic shifts, social expectations, criticism from others, and unexpected setbacks are unavoidable aspects of life. When a person depends entirely on these conditions to feel capable or motivated, their progress becomes fragile. Any difficulty can easily disrupt their direction. But when the mind has been trained to remain steady and purposeful, circumstances lose their power to dictate the course of one's life. Mastering the mind means developing awareness of one's thoughts, emotions, and impulses. The human mind naturally produces doubts, fears, and distractions. These mental patterns are not signs of weakness. They are simply part of being human. However, problems arise when these patterns begin to control behavior. A person who automatically obeys every impulse of fear or laziness gradually loses their ability to shape their own future. Inner mastery begins when a person learns to observe these impulses without immediately acting on them. Instead of reacting automatically, they create a small moment of awareness between thought and action. In that moment, they can choose the response that aligns with their deeper goals rather than their temporary emotions. This ability to choose consciously is the beginning of mental discipline. Over time, this practice builds inner stability. The mind becomes less influenced by short-term discomfort and more guided by long-term purpose. Tasks that once felt overwhelming begin to appear manageable because the individual no longer depends on perfect motivation. They act because they have decided to act, not because circumstances feel convenient. Another important aspect of mastering the mind is the ability to focus attention. In a world filled with distractions, attention has become one of the most valuable psychological resources. Every moment spent on unnecessary worry, comparison, or endless entertainment drains the energy that could be directed toward meaningful goals. A trained mind protects its attention carefully and directs it toward actions that create progress. When the mind becomes organized and intentional, the external world gradually begins to reflect that order. Decisions improve, habits become stronger, and persistence increases. Opportunities that once seemed invisible start to appear because the mind is no longer clouded by doubt or distraction. Success, in this sense, is not something magically delivered by circumstances. It is something constructed internally and then expressed through consistent action. In this way, mastering the mind becomes the most reliable path to achievement. Circumstances may fluctuate and environments may change, but a person who has learned to guide their own thoughts possesses a form of power that cannot easily be taken away. The human mind possesses immense potential, yet without discipline it can easily become its own greatest obstacle. When the mind lacks structure and direction, it begins to wander aimlessly through thoughts, impulses, and emotions. Instead of guiding a person toward purposeful action, it pulls attention in countless directions. This scattered state gradually produces distraction, doubt, and procrastination, three forces that silently prevent individuals from realizing their true capabilities. Distraction is often the first consequence of an undisciplined mind. In a world filled with endless stimulation, the mind naturally seeks novelty and immediate gratification. Without conscious control, attention shifts constantly from one idea to another, from one task to another, rarely settling long enough to create meaningful progress. What begins as a brief pause becomes a pattern of avoidance. Small distractions accumulate until entire days pass without real movement toward one's goals. The mind convinces itself that these diversions are harmless, yet they slowly drain energy and focus. Over time, this constant distraction weakens the individual's relationship with their own intentions. When attention is repeatedly pulled away from important tasks, the mind loses its sense of direction. Goals that once felt meaningful begin to appear distant and difficult. Instead of moving forward, the person remains trapped in cycles of partial effort and unfinished plans. Alongside distraction, doubt begins to grow quietly within the undisciplined mind. When actions are inconsistent and focus is scattered, confidence naturally begins to decline. The individual may start questioning their abilities, wondering whether they are capable of achieving the things they once imagined. This doubt rarely appears suddenly. It emerges gradually as the mind observes its own lack of commitment, Every postponed task becomes subtle evidence that reinforces uncertainty. The mind begins to produce narratives of limitation, telling stories about why success might be impossible or why the timing is not right. These internal voices can become powerful if left unchallenged, shaping how a person perceives both themselves and the world around them. Procrastination then becomes the natural companion of distraction and doubt. When the mind feels overwhelmed by uncertainty or tempted by easier alternatives, it searches for ways to delay effort. Tasks are pushed to tomorrow, then to the next week, and sometimes indefinitely. The person may remain busy with minor activities, convincing themselves that they are preparing or waiting for the right moment. Yet the deeper truth is that the mind is avoiding the discomfort that meaningful progress often requires. This avoidance creates a subtle psychological tension. The individual knows what needs to be done, yet repeatedly postpones action. The longer this pattern continues, the heavier the mental burden becomes. Instead of feeling energized by possibility, the mind begins to feel trapped by unfinished responsibilities and unmet expectations. An undisciplined mind therefore creates a cycle that feeds itself. Distraction weakens focus, weakened focus produces doubt, and doubt encourages procrastination. Each element reinforces the others until progress feels increasingly difficult. What makes this cycle particularly powerful is that it operates internally, often unnoticed until months or even years have passed. Yet the root of the problem is not a lack of intelligence or potential. The difficulty lies in the absence of mental structure. Without deliberate guidance, the mind follows the path of least resistance, choosing comfort and immediate pleasure over effort and long-term growth. In this state, even talented individuals may struggle to translate their ideas into reality because their attention is constantly diverted from the actions that would move them forward. Recognizing this pattern is the first step toward change. When a person becomes aware that distraction, doubt, and procrastination originate within the mind itself, they begin to understand that the true challenge is not external difficulty but internal disorder. Only through conscious discipline can the mind be trained to focus its energy on the goals that truly matter. The human mind constantly produces thoughts, emotions, and impulses, often faster than we can consciously notice them. Many of these reactions are automatic, shaped by past experiences, fears, desires, and habits developed over years. When a person lives without mental discipline, these impulses begin to control behavior. A moment of anger turns into harsh words, a wave of doubt stops progress, and the desire for comfort replaces the effort required for growth. Life then becomes a series of reactions rather than intentional choices. Mental discipline changes this relationship with the mind. It introduces awareness into the space between thought and action. Instead of instantly obeying every impulse that appears, a person begins to observe it first. This observation creates a subtle but powerful shift. Thoughts no longer hold the same authority they once did. They become signals that can be examined rather than commands that must be followed. Every impulse carries a certain emotional energy. Fear urges avoidance, pleasure encourages indulgence, and frustration seeks immediate release. These impulses are natural and part of the human experience, but problems arise when they operate without guidance. When the mind is undisciplined, it treats every feeling as an instruction. The individual becomes a passenger carried by shifting emotional currents rather than the driver of their own direction. Mental discipline allows a person to pause before reacting. In that pause, they can question the thought that has appeared. Is this fear based on reality or imagination? Is this distraction truly valuable, or is it simply an escape from effort? By asking these questions, the mind begins to separate temporary feelings from meaningful decisions. Over time, this practice strengthens self-control. Instead of avoiding difficult tasks because they feel uncomfortable, the disciplined mind recognizes discomfort as a normal part of progress. Instead of believing every doubt, it examines whether that doubt deserves attention. Gradually, the person becomes less reactive and more intentional. Choosing one as thoughts does not mean eliminating negative feelings entirely. Doubt, frustration, and uncertainty will still arise. The difference is that these emotions no longer dictate behavior. They are acknowledged but not obeyed blindly. A disciplined mind understands that feelings are temporary experiences, not permanent truths. This ability to choose thoughts also transforms how a person interprets challenges. When something goes wrong, The impulsive mind may immediately jump to conclusions, assuming failure or personal inadequacy. The disciplined mind, however, can pause and reinterpret the situation. Instead of seeing a mistake as proof of limitation, it can see it as information for improvement. This shift in perspective preserves motivation and encourages continued effort. Another important aspect of mental discipline is directing attention deliberately. Thoughts often wander toward worry, comparison, or past regrets. These patterns can drain emotional energy without producing any meaningful outcome. A trained mind recognizes when attention is being pulled into unproductive directions and gently redirects it toward constructive action. Through consistent practice, this process reshapes the inner landscape of the mind. What once felt chaotic gradually becomes organized. Reactions slow down, awareness grows stronger, and choices become clearer. The person begins to realize that they are not helpless in the face of their thoughts. They possess the ability to guide them. In this state, impulses lose their power to dominate behavior. The mind becomes a tool rather than a master. Decisions arise from clarity rather than emotional turbulence. And actions reflect deliberate intention rather than momentary urges. This quiet mastery over one's inner world forms the psychological foundation upon which lasting growth and achievement are built. Motivation is often celebrated as the driving force behind achievement. It appears in moments of inspiration when goals feel exciting and possibilities seem limitless. During these moments, effort feels natural and progress seems easy. However, motivation is deeply connected to emotion, and emotions are naturally unstable. They rise and fall depending on mood, circumstances, energy levels, and countless external influences. Because of this, relying solely on motivation can make progress inconsistent and unpredictable. Discipline operates in a completely different way. While motivation depends on emotional intensity, discipline depends on commitment and structure. It is the decision to continue acting even when excitement disappears. When a person builds discipline, they no longer wait for the right emotional state to begin or continue their work. Action becomes guided by intention rather than by temporary feelings. Every meaningful pursuit eventually reaches a point where motivation fades. At the beginning of a new goal, enthusiasm creates a powerful sense of momentum. The mind imagines the future with optimism, and the effort required does not feel heavy. But as time passes, the reality of repetition and difficulty emerges. Progress slows, challenges appear, and the novelty that once fueled excitement begins to disappear. At this stage, many people lose direction because their energy was built entirely on motivation. Discipline carries a person through this phase where motivation becomes unreliable. It creates a system where action is expected regardless of emotional fluctuation. Instead of asking, "Do I feel like doing this today?" the disciplined mind asks, "Is this aligned with my purpose?" This shift removes the emotional negotiation that often leads to delay or avoidance. Another reason discipline is more reliable is that it transforms behavior into habit. When actions are repeated consistently, they gradually become part of a person's daily rhythm. The effort required to begin decreases because the mind becomes familiar with the routine. What once required strong motivation now requires only a simple decision to follow the established pattern. This process reduces the mental resistance that often blocks progress. When a person depends on motivation, they must constantly generate emotional energy to overcome that resistance. But when discipline is present, resistance loses much of its power. The action becomes automatic, like a path that has been walked so many times it no longer requires conscious effort to follow. Discipline also builds psychological resilience. When people act only when they feel inspired, they become vulnerable to disappointment and fatigue. Any setback can quickly extinguish motivation, leaving them feeling discouraged. A disciplined person, however, views effort as a long-term commitment rather than a temporary burst of enthusiasm. They understand that progress is created through persistence, not through occasional intensity. Over time, this consistency produces visible results. Small actions, repeated daily, accumulate into meaningful change. Skills improve, knowledge deepens, and confidence grows. Interestingly, these results often reignite motivation. But by that point, motivation is no longer required to maintain progress. Discipline therefore acts as the quiet structure that supports long-term growth. It removes dependence on fluctuating emotions and replaces it with steady, deliberate action. Even on days when energy feels low or enthusiasm disappears, discipline keeps the individual moving forward. In this way, discipline becomes a dependable force that ensures progress continues regardless of emotional conditions. It transforms success from a temporary burst of effort into a sustained journey guided by commitment rather than by the unpredictable nature of motivation. A person's identity is often shaped by repeated experiences and the patterns of behavior they observe within themselves. The way someone thinks, reacts, and responds to challenges gradually forms a self-image that influences future action. When mental discipline becomes a consistent practice, it begins to reshape this inner identity in subtle but powerful ways. Instead of seeing themselves as someone controlled by moods, distractions, or fears, the individual starts to recognize a deeper capacity for self-direction and control. At first, the effort to discipline the mind may feel uncomfortable. The mind naturally resists structure because it is accustomed to following impulses and seeking immediate comfort. Choosing focus over distraction or persistence over avoidance requires conscious effort. Yet every time a person succeeds in guiding their thoughts or actions toward a purposeful direction, they create a small moment of self-trust. These moments may appear insignificant in isolation, but over time they accumulate into a new psychological foundation. Each disciplined decision becomes evidence that the individual is capable of directing their own life. When someone repeatedly keeps promises they make to themselves, even in small matters, their perception of who they are begins to change. Instead of identifying as someone who easily gives up or becomes overwhelmed, they gradually begin to see themselves as someone reliable, determined, and capable of growth. This transformation does not happen through sudden realization, but through repetition. The mind learns through experience. Every time a person chooses to complete a difficult task, return to focus after distraction, or remain calm in the presence of doubt, the brain records this behavior as part of the individual's character. Over time, these repeated actions strengthen neural patterns that support discipline and resilience. Inner confidence begins to grow naturally from this process. Confidence is often misunderstood as loud self-assurance or bold outward expression, but genuine confidence is much quieter. It emerges from the knowledge that one can rely on their own mind and action. When a person consistently proves to themselves that they can remain focused, overcome resistance, and persist through discomfort, they develop a sense of stability that external praise or criticism cannot easily disturb. Mental discipline also reduces the internal conflict that many people experience. An undisciplined mind often moves between intention and avoidance. A person may set goals with enthusiasm but abandon them when challenges appear. This creates frustration and weakens self-belief because the mind observes its own inconsistency. Discipline resolves this conflict by aligning intention with action. When thoughts and behaviors begin to move in the same direction, the mind experiences a sense of coherence and clarity. As this alignment strengthens, the individual's identity becomes more stable. They no longer define themselves by temporary emotions or passing failures. Instead, they recognize that their character is built through consistent choices made over time. Setbacks may still occur, but they are no longer interpreted as proof of inadequacy. Rather, they are seen as temporary events within a much larger process of growth. Gradually, this disciplined mindset becomes part of the person's natural way of being. Effort feels less like a struggle and more like an expression of who they are. The individual begins to trust their ability to navigate uncertainty, face challenges, and maintain focus even in difficult circumstances. This trust strengthens their sense of self and reinforces the belief that progress is always possible through steady commitment. In this way, consistent mental discipline reshapes identity from the inside out. It replaces uncertainty with self-trust, transforms scattered effort into purposeful action, and builds a quiet inner confidence rooted not in external validation but in the repeated experience of mastering one's own mind. When the mind becomes disciplined, it develops the ability to direct energy with clarity and purpose. Instead of being scattered across countless distractions and impulses, attention begins to concentrate on meaningful goals. This focused state allows a person to invest their time, effort, and thoughts into actions that gradually build progress. Success then stops being something mysterious or accidental and becomes the natural result of consistent, directed effort. A disciplined mind understands the value of attention. Every action begins with where attention is placed. When attention is weak and constantly shifting, effort becomes fragmented. Tasks remain unfinished, ideas fade before they are developed, and opportunities pass unnoticed. But when attention is trained to remain steady, the individual begins to see tasks through to completion. Even small actions gain power when they are performed with full concentration. This ability to focus creates momentum. Progress rarely appears suddenly. It grows from repeated actions that accumulate over time. A person who returns to their work each day with a clear mind slowly builds skill, knowledge, and experience. These qualities deepen with practice, allowing the individual to perform tasks with increasing effectiveness. What once required intense effort eventually becomes natural through repetition and refinement. Discipline also strengthens persistence, which is essential for long-term success. Every meaningful pursuit includes moments of difficulty, uncertainty, and temporary failure. Without mental discipline, these moments often cause people to abandon their efforts. The mind may interpret obstacles as signs that the goal is impossible or that the timing is wrong. A disciplined mind, however, interprets challenges differently. Instead of seeing them as reasons to stop, it views them as part of the natural process of growth. This shift in perspective allows a person to continue working even when results are not immediately visible. They understand that progress often occurs beneath the surface before it becomes obvious. Skills are improving, strategies are evolving, and resilience is strengthening even if the final outcome has not yet appeared. By remaining focused during these quiet phases of development, the individual gradually moves closer to meaningful achievement. Another powerful effect of mental discipline is the reduction of unnecessary mental noise. When the mind is undisciplined, it becomes crowded with doubts, comparisons, and worries about the opinions of others. These thoughts drain energy and weaken focus. A disciplined mind learns to recognize these distractions and release them. Instead of becoming trapped in endless mental debates, the person returns their attention to the actions that truly matter. As focus deepens, efficiency improves. Decisions become clearer because the mind is no longer overwhelmed by conflicting impulses. Time is used more effectively, and effort produces stronger results. This steady improvement begins to shape external circumstances. Opportunities often appear not because of luck, but because disciplined individuals are prepared to recognize and act upon them. Over time, the connection between focused action and achievement becomes increasingly visible. Projects are completed, goals are reached, and new possibilities begin to open. Observers may interpret this success as talent or fortunate timing, but the deeper cause lies in the consistent mental discipline that guided each step along the way. Success, in this sense, is not something forced into existence through sudden bursts of effort. It emerges gradually as the natural consequence of a mind that has learned to concentrate its energy, remain persistent through difficulty, and continue acting with clarity and intention. In the end, success is not built in a single moment of inspiration, nor is it granted by circumstances alone. It is quietly constructed within the mind long before it appears in the world. When you learn to guide your thoughts, control your impulses, and return your focus to what truly matters, you begin shaping a life that moves with purpose rather than confusion. The disciplined mind does not wait for perfect conditions. It creates progress through steady action. Every day offers a simple but powerful choice. You can allow distractions, doubts, and emotions to lead your path, or you can train your mind to remain steady and intentional. The moment you choose discipline, you begin reclaiming control over your direction. Each focused action becomes a small step toward a future built by conscious effort rather than by chance. Over time, these small steps transform into strength, clarity, and confidence. The person who once struggled with hesitation becomes someone who moves forward with quiet determination. The path that once seemed distant slowly unfolds through persistence and patience. So remember this, success is not something you chase endlessly in the outer world. It begins in the silent decisions you make within your own mind. Discipline your thoughts, guide your actions, and remain committed to your purpose. When the mind becomes steady and focused, everything else will eventually fall into place.